Hello, CHistrue. I'd like to talk about, well, common sense, particularly the philosophy of Thomas Reid. Thomas Reid formulated his philosophy in a theological sense, but his influence on American political theory, jurisprudence, and empiricism has gone far beyond the theological origins of his theory and has actually been pushed far beyond probably the bounds even Thomas Reid himself had intended. Thomas Paine was definitely not a Protestant Christian, as his book The Age of Reason will point out, but in his book Common Sense he realized that he had to appeal to a Protestant audience, and so he made heavy use of the idea of common sense, that our common sense is equal to that of any king or any priest or any prelate, any judge, any master, any official, and therefore the people should have the right to choose their own government. This was and yet Thomas Reid also had an influence on American liberal Christianity from his time until probably about the 1920s with the rise of fundamentalism and a shift in American Christianity away from rationalism and the kind of sense approach to the world towards more of the authority of the Bible. And although there were roots of that in the Great Awakenings and in Charles Finney and so forth. Okay, Thomas Reid. Thomas Reid posited that we can know God and that we can know moral sense by what he called common sense. It has been stereotyped that he meant the view of the multitudes, that 80% of the people believe something, therefore it's true. That's not quite what he intended. What he believed in was more of what you could call an intuitionism. I know that there's a flame underneath the boiling pot. I know that the flame causes that boiling pot to boil because I can see it. It is evidently true. I can trust my senses. And in the moral realm, I know that something is right because it feels right. It is right. Now, there are questions around whether a culture can imprint a wrong belief about something, but Reid seems to believe that that can right itself by a kind of approach to the world. That if you're shorn of that kind of contamination, if you see things rightly, that all human beings have an inherent moral sense. Now, this swam against two currents within Western philosophy, one secular and one religious. The secular opposition to him would have come from David Hume, would have come from the viewpoint of how do we really know that our senses, strictly speaking, tell us what we want to see. And eventually, within Western scientific tradition, where there was probably more so than in philosophy, a sympathy for Reid's idea of common sense, that yes, we can trust our sensory perceptions, but even there, eventually there was certainly with quantum physics, oddly enough, around the time of the 20th century, but also in biology and in other fields, there was that departure from the early scientific trust that nature's rules were going to be simple. That nature's rules were going to be a simple matter of understanding a mechanism. So Western science and philosophy looked at Reid's common sense a little bit like you look at a country bumpkin. No offense to country bumpkins. I love you guys. I know you're subscribed to my channel. I'm one at heart. So, takes one to know one. But there was also opposition from within the religious realm, particularly among the people we could call fundamentalists. Their viewpoint was that because in their eyes humanity was fallen, we therefore our common sense was corrupted, that we inherited original sin, and there was a garden, and there was a talking snake, and okay, well, anyways, you know the account, all right? And so they held a viewpoint that our ordinary view of common sense and our ordinary perception of the world cannot be equal to reality. We need the authority of the Bible, and we need divine revelation. Now, this viewpoint was a countercurrent within American Christianity that would have had no countenance with quote-unquote common sense or Thomas Reid. and certainly would have looked to deists applying common sense, or even atheists eventually adopting the common sense idea as being proof that this was a bad concept. Oddly enough, the criticism from fundamentalists and from the very orthodox parallels that in the Islamic world in the Middle Ages, where they would have viewed cause and effect as detracting from the authority of God, that ultimately it's God that causes all things. And perhaps if you go even further, you go into the Eastern world, where you might say that all things are God. So they would go even further away from the Western type of empiricism. But the Western empiricism itself and Western religious thought itself both had powerful critiques of this idea of common sense from two different standpoints. But it did influence political philosophy. And I would say maybe in some negative ways, but I would say also in some very positive ways. Thomas Paine, common sense, right? Your moral judgment is equal to that of any king, any priest, any judge. Jurisprudence. Thomas Reid was cited as an authority in legal jurisprudence, as a philosopher, what it means to be a witness. He put a lot of credence on the idea that a witness, by the way, the Genesis story isn't as simple as, a talking snake. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism there. I think it can be read very esoterically, but that's, neither here nor there. It's interesting to know whether Thomas Reid had a strict orthodox interpretation of Genesis or not. If he didn't, he might have a more symbolic understanding. It might contradict his common sense viewpoint. But on the other hand, his common sense Christianity influenced people who did believe that creation and evolution could be reconciled. But that's an aside. Back to the issue of jurisprudence. The idea that we can trust the common sense of the people was instrumental in the idea of a democratic society, and eventually even more the idea of reform, that we can trust the common sense of the workers, therefore the workers should have more power in society. They have the right to vote. Whether Thomas Reid himself pushed his idea this far or not, I mean, he lived in the 18th century, and these reforms were 19th and 20th century reforms. But if you think about it, the whole idea that I have as much of a right to an opinion as some wealthy and very well-educated and very prominent person has a lot to do with the idea that my five senses and my moral sense and my intellectual faculties can be trusted. Well, we've departed from that in much of Western philosophical thought, particularly in not only analytical philosophy, but certainly it would look like continental philosophy has departed from it a great deal of postmodernism. And also in the realm of theology, it's become a lot more conservative, a lot kind of return to the idea of the authority of religion, the kind of authority-based viewpoint. Can American democracy survive the departure from common sense? I think it's an open question. No, I would say that common sense is not a guide to all things. It can be manipulated. As statisticians have pointed out, that things that seem obvious sometimes are not. But there's a deeper issue here of a trust in the inherent faculties of the individual. I don't think Thomas Reid himself would have said, oh yeah, a simple common sense is a guide to all things. No. Simple common sense is out the window. But a deeper kind of sense, a deeper sense that you can trust rational faculties to understand the world, seems to have been borne out by science. It seems to have been borne out by this very computer that I'm broadcasting to you on is produced with a scientific method that trusts the faculty of human reason. If we depart from that to the realm of mystery, Father knows best, the state knows best, the corporation knows best, the military knows best, mother knows best, dad knows best, then we're departing from something fundamental to the best of our political system. CHistrue, signing off.